All right.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome. This is Coach Bo with the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. I hope you all are doing wonderful today. I hope whatever you're doing, wherever you're at, you are enjoying your day and that you're making the most out of it. And with that said, we're going to get right into it here. On episode 59 last week, we discussed a wonderful quote, something that we can all learn from and take from, and that is, and this quote comes from Tom Landry, the late, great Dallas Cowboys coach. He said, quote, "Leadership is a matter of having people look at you and gain confidence. If you're in control, they're in control," end quote. And that's so important when players are looking at adults to be leaders, to lead them, to set an example. And it starts with being in control of yourself. And that includes getting enough sleep at night, making sure that you're coming to the field with good energy and you're in the right frame of mind. That's some of the root causes, and we can break those down over time. But that quote is so great. Leadership is a matter of having people, your players, look at you and gain confidence. Players gain confidence. They have a sense of sturdiness and anchor when they see that you're in control, that you are, as the coach, in control. Then they will, in a lot of cases, in most cases, will follow suit and they will follow the modeling that you set as a coach. Same thing goes for parenting. Same thing goes for being a teacher. And the same thing goes for any business out there. Somebody who's looking up to a boss, a leader, a CEO, somebody in charge, a manager. They want to see that they're in control. And you as the leader, the manager, the coach, the boss may not be in control inside. You may be very high anxiety. You may have stress, and those are things that you got to work through. And I'm not going to get into those right now. We all know what that feels like. But on the outside, you have to control. You have to give the perception that everything is in control. Now, hopefully you can get to a place and work on healthy habits and things like that where you can not have to put on a front. It really just kind of is who you really are. But it is a stressful world, and life is just in general has stressors, right? It just is what it is. And so we can't always be perfect, and we're not always going to be perfect with our level of stress and worry, anxiety, things like that, even controlling our ego. But there are some things that you can do, obviously, healthier habits that can get that better. And at the end of the day, no matter what, you got to show that you're in control. So last week we discussed that quote. We also discussed in part one of last week the three main benefits of having your stuff, your coaching system scripted and written out, at a minimum, bulleted out. Part two of last week, we talked about some practical nutrition tips, hydration, and simple fruit intake before a game, leading up to a game, that I think can make a big difference. And it's something that you could almost systematize in a way that it gets done before every game on a routine level. And lastly, part three, I shared with you slugging percentage improvement and batting average percent improvement through the lens of statistical percentage improvement, more specifically. So if you haven't listened to that, episode 59, go back. In fact, if you haven't listened to any of the other episodes, go back. It's just all loaded with stuff that's going to help you be a better coach, a better player, a better parent of a player. It's loaded with stuff for all levels, every single level. I do primarily focus more specifically on the youth level, but you're crazy if you think that the youth level coaching is that much different than college level coaching or professional level coaching. It is slightly different. Sure, it's going to be a little more finite, a little more acute when you get to the professional level. There's more accountability and responsibility, and that's expected. But in my opinion, the professional game probably needs a little bit more leadership and a little bit more coaching than it has over the years. It's always kind of been like, hey, well, they can figure it out, or hey, they're adults, this, that, and the other. It's like, no, you're the coach. You're a lot older than the players. Coaches are typically, even at the professional level, a lot older than the players. So I think that default attitude that's been around for a long time, just let them do their thing. They're going to do their thing. They made it this far, I think is absolutely erroneous. But I'm not going to get into that right now. But the main focus in this podcast is really working with the youth baseball community, the high school baseball community, because that's 98% of all baseball. I mean, 99, it could be 99.99. I haven't quantified it, but I'm guessing it's definitely at least 98%, if not 99 point whatever percent of all baseball. All right, now for episode 60, we got three parts. We got part one. I'm going to break down a book. We're not going to get into extreme length on it, but we're going to dive in a little bit into a book called The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke. And he really dives into what Nick Saban, who's absolutely got some things we can learn from, absolutely has some things we can learn from, and some things we can learn from not to do. So definitely a lot of things we can learn from to do as a coach, but definitely some things that I've talked about on this podcast before. So Nick Saban, we're going to break down a couple things that came up in the book. There's 3 things that came up in the book that really stood out to me that I'm going to share with you that I think can help. In part 2, we're going to talk about a 3-step approach to coaching your players when it comes to praise, when it comes to rules, and when it comes to critiquing technique. So there's a 3-step approach we're going to discuss there. And really what it's going to be is I'm going to share with you a 3-step approach, a 3-prong approach to communicating with your players during practice time and during the games. And then in part 3 of this episode, we're going to discuss the first thing all coaches and players should look to improve when it comes to the pitching delivery, the hitter's swing, etc. All right, now before we get into part 1, you can, it would be awesome if you could do this, go support the podcast. You can support this podcast. It's super fast and super easy to do. You go to the link that's in the show notes. There's just a link. You click on that and it's all secure. It's all through Stripe, which is the most well-known payment thing. It's very easy to do. If you could just support the program, it would be much appreciated. I do get this edited by my phenomenal editor, Sam, and Sam edits this each and every week, and he's doing work. He's putting in good work. He gets paid. I pay him. So there are expenses on this, and also it takes a lot of time to put a good quality product out there. I don't just willy-nilly this together. I don't just get on the mic. And because it's not an interview format, it definitely takes more planning because I can't just ask a question and sit back for 5 minutes and listen. I have to bring the content to you. And again, that's why it's not a long form. It's also a 30-minute form podcast. So anyways, if you could go and support the podcast when you're right now or when you're done, that would be great. It's just going to keep it rolling along and moving along and hopefully keep getting better. And I told you guys that in one of the very first episodes, those of you that listened to it, and I see most of you have gone back and listened to most of those looking at the statistics for the podcast. I was very upfront. I said, I'm going to get better. I promise I'm going to keep getting better with this podcast thing. I want to do this. I want to share it with you. I feel it's a calling. And I said up front, I said, I'm going to get better with this. It's going to get better. It's not always going to be perfect, but it's going to get better. The quality, the editing, the sound, the content. I'm trying to get better each and every week to give you all something that is worth your time and that's going to have big needle movers in it in an efficient format that you can take out and have a lot of success on a lot of different levels as a coach, as a player, as a parent. So it would be much appreciated if you could support the podcast. Even just small donations, small support would be great and much appreciated. With that said, let's get into part 1, Nick Saban, The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke. Phenomenal book. Interesting backstory on Nick Saban. If you want to know that backstory on Nick Saban, go read that book or listen to the audiobook like I did. Really liked that book. It was really interesting. But the 3 things that stood out that I wanted to share with you. So when I listen and I read books or I listen to these books or I read articles and I go to websites or I watch videos, I always try to look at it through the lens of a youth coach, a high school coach, or any coach and how they could use it and what can I take out of it? What can I extrapolate and then share with you? What are the main nuggets, big needle movers? Number 1, something that stood out. The first year Nick Saban was a head coach, and I believe it was 1990. The first year he was a head coach, he was at Toledo University, and he kicked the best defensive player off the team almost immediately. He kicked the best defensive player off the team almost immediately because that player crossed the line with him and he kicked him off the team. Now, with some back channel support and the assistant coaches, he brought him back around. In other words, he let him back on the team. And this is kind of a slippery slope in ways, but nonetheless, he took a returning player. It was like a returning, I don't know if he was All-American, I can't recall, but the main message was his first head coaching job. He kicked the best defensive player, the best returning defensive player off the team. Almost immediately, defensive player called him out on something. Nick Saban didn't hesitate, kicked him off the team, and it set the message. They interviewed some of the players that were on that team, and they said, oh, that set the tone right then and there. He has rules, he has expectations, and he follows them, and he's going to follow through with them. Again, I don't think you should have 1,000 rules. I don't think you should have any more rules than you truly need, and definitely you do not want to have any more rules than you're willing to enforce, and you do not have a rule. You should not have a rule or an expectation, or as I just recently heard a coach talk about, a standard. You shouldn't have a standard, a rule, an expectation unless you're going to follow through with it, unless you're going to enforce it, unless you're going to have a consequence if it get, or why have it? If you have no leverage, there's no reason to have it. Well, I check that. There's a reason to have it, even though you might not have a consequence, because there's going to be players, there's going to be kids, there's going to be players that just follow it because you've set that forth and they respect what you said. But you're fooling yourself if you think that's going to be every team you coach, and definitely going to have players push it. They're going to push it. It just is what it is. And they like to have boundaries. I've used this analogy before. When you set rules, your rules should not be like the cage at the zoo. All right, I'm not going to get into the whole animal rights thing right here, okay? That's not my shtick. What I want to share with you is you go to the zoo. I went to the zoo. I took my daughter to the zoo. She loved the zoo. She's checking out the animals. And I said, dang, man, some of these animals are in tight quarters. They're real tight. I'm like, that's got to suck. And then I thought about like growing up, you always used to hear about the San Diego Wild Animal Park. And it was like this much bigger park, right? Much bigger, more expansive area where the animals could live, but they couldn't leave. That's the kind of rules that you got to have. That's kind of the lens, kind of the paradigm you have to look at when you set your rules. You want to have rules, but it should be like a wild animal park where there is a fence, there is a line in the sand, there is literally a barrier where they cannot get through, but you're not so tight and dictatorial. You're not a dictator. You're not just breathing down their neck on every little thing. You're not micromanaging them. I believe there's 4 rules that every coach should have. All right. I believe there's 4 rules that every coach should have, and those are non-negotiables. I believe in a tiered consequence system, and we can get into that at another time. So Nick Saban kicked the best defensive player off the team. I don't believe in kicking players right off the team right away like that. But in college, it's these are 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. It's a little different than a 12-year-old, a 9-year-old, a high schooler. But he set the rule because he knew if he let that slide, then there was a lot of other players that were going to follow suit, and then he was going to lose the team. See, most coaches, they fall into the trap that, if they I don't want to enforce it here with this player. I'm going to let this slide here. And they think because they're saving one player, they're saving 2 players. But what they're really doing is they're losing the rest of the team. So Nick Saban put his foot down. And again, I don't think Nick Saban yelling at players. I think he's a little more transactional than transformational. A little bit. I do think he's transformational, definitely. And I do think he does a plethora of wonderful things as a coach that I would definitely encourage coaches to copy. But I think his yelling at players, I think his perfectionist attitude is a little bit much. It's definitely, I'm not a fan of yelling. I think if you have to yell, then you're doing something wrong other places. He does coach older, young men, so he can get away with it a little bit more. But even then, some of his players have come out and they're not really big fans of it. I think there's other ways to do it. But nonetheless, he kicked the best player off his team, the best defensive player off the team, set the tone, and nobody crossed that line because he set the line in the sand. The second thing I got out of the book, The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke. Nick Saban excels at being very detailed with all the big needle movers. So he's detailed. I've talked to people about this over the years. They go, hey, with the 80-20 rule, it sounds like you're not worried about the details. You're just worried about the big things. And that couldn't be further from the truth. What it is, the 80-20 principle, the 80-20 rule, 80-20 baseball, just kind of living your life on the 80-20 rule is knowing that not everything you do has the same impact or the same effect on the production down the road, on the results, on how your life turns out, on how your coaching turns out, on how your parenting turns out. Not everything is the same. If you give your kid half an orange instead of a whole orange, when they go to school each day for lunch, well, maybe some dietitian somewhere is saying, hey, they're a little low on vitamin C. But if you don't give your kid love, if you don't give your kid security, those aren't the same thing. I mean, there's just such a, so you can spend all this time trying to nickel and dime, I should say, nitpick all these little things in their life and micromanage them, or you can focus on the big needle movers like setting parameters and setting expectations and loving them and knowing that they can come to you and the trust with you as a parent. So we could go on and on about how this plays out, but what Nick Saban does with the detail, and this is so important to understand, he finds the big needle movers and then he gets very detailed with how he's going to operate and put those in and how those routines and procedures and that system is going to look. So he finds things that are big deals. One thing I thought was also interesting, and this is something I didn't read in the book, but this is something I knew about Nick Saban, or I've come to learn about Nick Saban, is he doesn't pay attention to any of those recruiting rankings. He does his own recruiting and he does his own analysis. And I think that's super important. So you hear a lot of, say you coach in a league and you hear a lot of great things about a player, but you're out there at tryouts or the player comes to try out for your team and you've heard all these good things about them as a player, but maybe there's something that just doesn't add up. Maybe you don't think it's a good fit for your team. And that's something you got to keep into, you got to make your own decision. You got to go with your intuition. If the player comes out and it's just not a good fit, Again, most coaches fall into the trap of losing their team because they want to save a player. And I'm not saying you shouldn't try to save your players I'm not a big fan of kicking them off the team, but it comes to a point where you're going to lose your whole team if you try to bend and bend all your rules. And you have to be fair. If you start bending rules for one player, this is my point. If you start bending rules, cutting slack for one player, well, you better do it for all your players. Now, you can try to rationalize and tell your team this, that, and the other, but they're going to see it as, hey, this doesn't apply to everybody equally. And that's a bad place to be as a coach. All right, Nick Saban, he excels at being very detailed with all the big needle movers. He's very detailed with the big needle movers. So there's certain things like hitting and pitching. You want to be detailed with those. You want to be detailed at being able to throw the ball. Now, a perfect example of where you shouldn't spend a whole lot of time being detailed is how to complete a rundown effectively. I'm not saying you shouldn't practice rundown defense, pickle defense, but you don't need to spend a lot of time being super detailed on that, because you're going to take the bandwidth of your players and you're going to put it on something that happens every second or third game. It's really not going to make a difference in your season for the most part. Some of you might say, well, what about in the championship game and it did cost us? Okay, but you know what? You got to play the percentages, and players only have a certain amount of bandwidth. You only have a certain amount of practice time. That's just how it is. So you want to be very detailed on the big needle movers like throwing, fielding, hitting. Those are big needle movers. And now for the third thing that I wanted to share with you that I got from the book, The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke, a fantastic book discussing Nick Saban and his path into coaching. Number 3 was he has a scripted, known system. So it's almost like Nick Saban, his system is exactly like you would if some of you are familiar with this franchising. If you're going to franchise, you have to have everything scripted out. If you don't, you're not going to be very successful, right? So if you want to franchise out your business or you want to buy a franchise, you're going to get a book that says, if you want a McDonald's franchise, for example, it's a well-known franchise, probably the most well-known franchise. You're going to say, yeah, I want to get a franchise. You apply, yada, yada, yada. You put down your deposit, or you put down, your down payment, you get a franchise. And so you become a franchisee. And now from there, you're going to get this huge book, or probably all PDF now, and it's going to lay out every single thing. There's going to be parameters on every single thing. Every single step is going to be outlined, not bulleted. And I shouldn't even say outlined. It's going to be scripted out for you. So the nice thing about a franchise is that you're going to have a recipe that works. The downside is that you don't have really a lot of individual creativity. With that said, it works for a lot of people, may not work for you. Maybe you have some creativity you want to expand upon, but when it comes to coaching, you should have a system, and this is what Nick Saban does. He has a system that's scripted and it's known, and I think this allows for your assistant coaches, and as you build, your assistant coaches can learn from it. Also, we talked about having a system is there's 3 benefits. Go back and listen to episode 59, the last episode. I lay out the 3 main benefits of a coaching system for you as a coach. There are some others that I was upfront. I said, hey, these aren't the only 3, but these are the main 3. Another one is you can hand off your coaching script, your system, to anybody. You could have the players essentially run the practice by themselves, or an assistant run the practice by themselves with a high level of consistency. I'm a huge fan of this. I'm a huge fan of scripting out. I script out my workout routine. I script out so much stuff, but I'm not afraid to change it. I'm not afraid to adjust it. In fact, I feel like I can make improvements and adjustments because I script out almost everything. I bullet it out, like what are the main things, the 80-20, like I was talking earlier about the 80-20 rule in parenting. When I became a father, I laid out like, these are the 6 things, these are the 5 things. And if you ever want those, I can share them with you. Email me, I can share them with you, but you could pretty much guess what they are. It's just a matter of having them in writing and then reflecting back on them and knowing these are the 6 things that I need to be really good at. And this is the order. It's almost like a priority order to systems and creating a routine. A system doesn't just make things easier to follow along with, but it helps you prioritize things. So I'm a big fan of scripting things out. I'm a huge fan of doing this on a lot of levels because I just think it just saves us a lot of time. And I believe if you have things scripted out, they're much easier to assess and then adjust. I think many of us initially think when we hear systems, we hear rigidity. And when we hear like routine and structure, we hear rigidity. And I believe that you have a system, you have routines, you have procedures all scripted out, knowing that you're going to adjust them and you're going to be able to assess them and test them, knowing that you want to improve them better. To wrap it up, the 3 things that I got from The Making of a Coach by Monty Burke, Nick Saban's story. He kicked the best defensive player off the team in his first year. We talked about being a little cautious kicking players off the team, especially youth players, but he did do it. It set the tone. So in other words, he said, this is the expectation, and he didn't hesitate, even when it was and cost him. And Nick Saban is a defensive coach. I know he's a head coach now, but he's a defensive coach. In fact, he played defensive back in college at Kent State. And a little side note, he was actually at Kent State when that National Guard shooting took place. And I know some of you coaches, maybe you're not aware of what happened, but this was a big story, a huge story. I think it happened in 1970 or early 70s, 1970. My parents, they bring it up once a year because it was right when they were in college, and it was a huge deal then. And he was actually at Kent State when that happened. He was a defensive back. He did play quarterback when he was younger. And in fact, there was some college interest, smaller college interest in him being a quarterback because he was just so competitive and just so demanding of himself that they thought he would come through and win games for them. But he was a defensive back. He became a defensive coordinator, Bill Belichick hired him to be the defensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns when Bill Belichick first became a head coach for the Cleveland Browns in the 90s. And believe it or not, Bill Belichick was a defensive coordinator for the New York Giants and won 2 Super Bowls as the defensive coordinator for the New York Giants in the NFL. And then he hired Saban. And so Nick Saban is a very well-respected defensive mind, and he kicks his best defensive player off the team. So he knew the value of this player, and he still kicked him off the team because he definitely had seen film on him. You know, that's one of the first things coaches do when they get a new gig is they watch film of last year's games or even a couple years' games to see what they're working with. So he kicked the best defensive player off his team. He excels at being very detailed with all the big needle movers. So he finds the big needle movers, the things that he as a coach can do, his program can do that really make the biggest difference on his team culture, on the scoreboard. And then he gets detailed on how to improve those. He looks for little finite details to improve upon and those little advantages, those little 1% advantages within the big needle movers. And lastly, he has a very well-known scripted system, very well-known system that he has had a lot of success with. All right, part 2. Here's a 3-step process, a 3-step action plan, coaches. I try to boil things down and distill them down, not because you can't understand all the finite details. I know all of you can. I know you're all smart enough to know all this stuff, but I'm trying to boil it down because your time is finite. Your time is precious. You want the things that are really going to make a big impact. So if you're listening to this podcast and you've listened to it over the last year, the last 59, this being the 60th episode, you might be asking, well, he didn't cover all this, or he didn't cover all that, or he left this out. Yes, I do that on purpose. I don't cover. You could probably break down everything like hitting into like 30 things that can make hitters better. But we talk about the hitting approach because I believe that's substantially more important. Swinging at the right pitch is substantially more important than anything you can do with swing technique. And then you move to the swing technique after that. And speaking of which, in part 3 here in just a minute, we are going to discuss something that I believe is a huge needle mover when it comes to the swing technique, pitching delivery, etc. And we'll get to that in just a second. So here is a 3-step process, a 3-step approach, a 3-step action plan for communicating with your players. This is the paradigm you got to have. Here we go. Praise often, looking for the good. Look for the good. So number 1, praise often. Give compliments. Look for the good. Look for your players hustling, doing things good. Look for it. Seek it. It's there. Find it and praise often and praise loudly. Praise often and praise loudly. And last thing, spread that praise out as best you can. Praise often, praise loudly, look for the good, and a couple last points to this. So now we're getting detailed. These are the 3 steps that I believe are the 80% of the needle mover when it comes to communicating. We're going to get a little more detailed here. Praise often, praise loudly, look for the good. Be specific with your praise. Try not to just get caught up in the, hey, good job, or hey, that was nice, or this. Those are generic statements. They have very little impact on players. They have an impact, especially players with low self-esteem, but they have less impact, much less impact than a specific compliment. So praise early, praise often, look for the good, be specific with your praise. Be specific. It doesn't have to be more than a sentence or 2, but be specific with it. Why? What was it that they did good? And also maybe you can add in there how it's going to help them and the team improve. Also, the praise and the compliments don't have to be specific to an acute event. They can be something like, hey, I'm proud of you for your improvement. I'm proud of you guys for your hustle this year. I'm proud of you. Using the word proud is a big deal and can go a long ways with building rapport with your players and trust with your player and building up that motivation and that confidence within them. So you're going to build rapport with them by praising them. You're going to build rapport. They're going to trust you more. They're going to listen to you more, especially when you have things that aren't as on the up and up, right? When you got to lay down a little bit of enforcement on some rules, or you have something that you want to discuss with them that you're not pleased with. By building the praise, by making those deposits, those positive deposits, when you go to make the withdrawal, it's going to be a big deal. I'll tell you what, I think 10-to-1 ratio. Okay, so you hear a lot about this 3-to-1 positive to negative. I don't even get into that stuff. I know that's talked about in the education system a lot, and I've studied that. In fact, the people who've kind of brought that, I've actually sat in seminars with the people that have written out those and kind of done the studies on those. And I'm just like, if you're all about, having a ratio, you're going to miss the boat, I think. You want to go out there and just look for the good. Look for the good. Look to praise. Look to praise early, loud, often. Look for the good. Be specific with your praise. It can be kind of a broader compliment too, like when you bring the whole team up, like you're proud of them. It can be, I think really giving a personal compliment is super important on a lot of levels. I think it's much more valuable, like a personal compliment, especially in front of the peers. That's why I say praise loudly and praise with enthusiasm. Be genuine with your praise. Don't just do it because you have this mental quota of compliments. Be genuine. Be genuine. Give genuine praise. Be happy. Clap. Smile. Look for the good. Be specific. Give specific compliments, maybe to players that are struggling on the up and up. Don't make up compliments. If you look for the good, it will come naturally. It will come to you. You don't need to go seek it. Look for the good. The players are doing good for the most part. Look for the good. It's also going to make your time out there as a coach a lot more fun, a lot more enjoyable. Now, step 2, enforce your rules always. Don't bend and surely don't break. Now, you can bend with your consequences insofar as that you have tiered consequences outlined. That's a different type of bending. You don't bend because one player gets treated differently than another player or they get the consequence handed down differently. Don't do that. You can bend by having a tiered consequence system. Say you have a tier 1 is a warning, tier 2 is a 1 game benching, and tier 3 is a 2 or 3 game benching or suspension, and tier 4 or tier 5. I like the tier 4 being removal from the team. But remember, if you've been praising and you've been looking for the good and you've been building a rapport with your players, they're probably going to react and respond and change and fix things pretty quickly when you start enforcing the rules. So you praise often, praise loudly. Then number 2, action step 2 is enforce your rules always. Have them outlined before the season even starts. Have everybody on board knowing the rules. They don't need to agree with the rules, but they need to be on board that they know what the rules and the expectations, the standards are going to be, and then enforce them always. Don't bend and surely don't break. And then part 3, action step 3 with communication. Critique technique intermittently. Let me say that again. Critique technique intermittently. Most of us coaches, we don't praise enough. We're not looking for the good enough. And we also critique too much. We micromanage. We helicopter coach. The only time you should helicopter coach is when you're looking for the good. You should always try to see the good that players are doing. You should always try to see it and always point it out as best you can. You're not going to see everything, but you should try your best. And you should try to helicopter coach when it comes to enforcing your rules. You need to know when the rules are broken, and then you need to enforce the consequences immediately and clearly. When it comes to critique technique, it should be intermittent. So when you're critiquing one of your pitcher's delivery, their mechanics, you don't need to critique them all the time. Hitting swings, you don't need to sit there and make a comment about the technique all the time. And surely when a ball goes between your shortstop's legs or your third baseman's legs or your outfielder drops a fly ball, you shouldn't just automatically default to critiquing, especially the first time this happens in a practice or even in a game. In a game, I would be much more hesitant to yell out across the field in a game. All right, because not only does that player have their peers from their team out there, but now they have peers that they know from the other team out there. And I'm not saying you let it slide if it's a hustle thing. I'm not saying you let it slide if it's a disrespect. In fact, if it's a disrespect thing, I'm pretty loud about that. That's the one time I will raise my voice and my firmness of my tone. And I don't care who hears because I want it to be known that disrespect is not going to be loud, whether it's for the umpire, whether it's for the team, or whether it's for one of the players' teammates. It doesn't matter. That is something that I'm a little bit more loud about. But when it comes to them making an error, slow your roll as a coach. Stop overdoing it. Trust me on this. When is there time to then tell them? When they come in the dugout, that's the time. Or when you get a second off to the side, that's the time. What I found is almost always anything you can critique and try to change and fix while the player is out there in the middle of a game, whether it's on defense or in the batter's box or on the pitching mound or on the bases running, there's nothing that you can probably tell them that's really going to make that quick adjustment that's going to solve the problem right then and there. Again, we're going to look to improve. We do need to critique, and players do need to learn how to take criticism and some critiquing. They do, absolutely. In fact, I think we coddle our youth too much. I just think there's a better time and place to do it. I've told you the story about some of the best things. I work with some hardcore gangbanger kids, some hardcore gang member kids. I say gangbanger, that's what they call themselves, gang member kids. You call whatever you want. I'm not trying to be PC here. That's what they call themselves. I worked with kids from South Central LA for 12 full years. And what I would do with them is I would praise loud. These kids would go to war for me. By the time I was done with them at the end of the year, these kids all knew. I mean, the rapport and the trust that I had built because I screwed up many times early on in my career. And I lost classes, I lost students, I lost whatever trust that I had in them because I just didn't execute. They knew I cared, but I wasn't executing it right. And I would call them out loud. I would bust them up a little bit verbally, in front of everybody. And I learned that's just no way, especially with that group. And so what I learned was, I'm going to praise loud. I'm going to look for the good. I'm giving praise. Even these hardcore kids, they're really soft inside. They're really marshmallows inside. In fact, that's why they go to gangs, because they need that love. They want love. So they go to the gangs. They're really marshmallows inside. They got this tough exterior, and they are tough on the exterior, but they're marshmallows inside, and they want to melt a little, and they want some love. And so I would just get them aside, not always right away. Sometimes I would wait a little bit. I might even wait till the next day if I didn't think it was a serious safety issue, right? And I would get them aside and I'd get in their ear. I'd literally kind of almost talk in a whisper and just tell them with a very firm voice that what they did is not acceptable. It's not going to happen again. This is not their class. This is not going to fly. And I would let it be known. And I would let it be known very firmly and very sternly. Now, I was working with kids that could handle this. These were 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids that came from the streets. They could handle it. And I would be very firm in their ear with it. And then I would let it be. And I would just say, hey, and then I would always use something like the phrase, something like, hey, we're on this thing. We're teammates in this. We're together. We're together. Now, never was I ever showing them that I was a friend by any means. But what I would tell them is like, hey, we're on the same team. We're on the same team. And then I would be real firm with them. But I would do it low key. And at the end, I had students a couple times say to me, hey, Mr. A, that's really cool how you just didn't blast me in front of everybody. Because that's the last thing they want. But they want to be put in check. They just don't want to be put in check in front of everybody. Now, some of you coaches go, they need to learn how to do that. Yeah, good luck. You go do that. Go do that. Let me know how that turns out. All right. I know how that path is going to go. You'll get the 1 out of 20 kids that does it and it works. The other 19 are going to just be like, they're going to have resentment for you and it's going to boil inside. You're not going to see it. It's going to be there though. And that trust dissolves. Trust dissolves on the inside. It's not something you see on the outside very often. That's got to be some kind of traumatic event for that to really show up on the outside, but the trust dissolves. So the three parts on the action step when it comes to communicating and kind of running your team in terms of what you're saying to them. Compliments early, often, look for the good, be specific. Also tell the team you're proud of them. Try to be more individual with your compliments, but you can also share it with the team. Things like, hey, you're proud of their hustle. You're proud of them. You're proud of the player if they've shown it over time. Give them compliments if they make a great play, if they hustle, especially if they hustle or do something kind for a teammate or respectful, but don't sit there and milk it either. Be firm, be genuine with it, and then get back to whatever's going on with the practice and look for more good. There's an unlimited amount of compliments. There's no quota. It just should be unlimited amount of positive praise that you are giving to your players. See, this is where I think the coaching community, the parenting community, the teaching community, all three communities I've been in, all three communities I've spent a lot of time in. And I think this is really where the ball gets dropped. There's a huge misunderstanding, and it's causing so many problems that do not need to happen that can be avoided. So many coaches, parents, and teachers think that you either got to be a dictator or you got to be super friendly, but you can't be in between. You can't be friendly and then have rules and enforce rules or this, that, and the other. If you don't critique everything or if you don't correct everything, that you're not doing your job. Here's the thing. You can absolutely praise and then turn right around and enforce your rules. And the players love that. They're not going to love rule. They're going to be mad at themselves more. If you praise them, if you look for the good, and then you follow through with your rules, they might not always just jump for joy when you enforce the rules, but they're going to like it. They're going to want that. They want parameters. They want to have a sense of anchoring. You are the anchor as a coach. And now it goes back to being somebody who's in control, so the players see you in control. They also want to know that there's control of the environment. So praise loudly, enforce rules always, and critique the technique intermittently. You don't need to critique every time they make an error. In fact, you actually send a really good message. This is something that I've never heard any coach talk about at any conference, on any podcast, anywhere, in any book. This is something that is absolutely true. Absolutely true. And it's important if you want to be a truly successful coach, you understand this concept. When players mess up and they know that you know they messed up, ball goes between their legs, they look over at you, they know you saw it, and you don't say anything right then about it. Again, it's a physical error. It's a ball goes between their legs, or they swing and miss at a pitch, or they walk a batter if they're pitching. They know you see it. They see your eye contact. And then you don't feel the need to just correct it and yell at them or even say anything about it, at least right then. Maybe later on, if it's a pattern. I look for patterns. I look for patterns. If it's disrespect, call it out immediately. If it's hustle, call it out immediately. Everything else, I'm looking for some patterns. I want to see a little bit of a trend before I just jump some player, get on him over an air between his legs. I can't tell you how many times I've been out there working as a coaching consultant or as a coach myself as a player. And it's like the first thing in practice, first drill, first ball goes between the shortstop's legs or the first baseman's legs, or they drop the ball in the outfield, and then the coach just goes like, says something. It's like, hey, the player knows he screwed up. He knows it. They're not dumb. They're smart. They know they were supposed to field that ball. They know they were supposed to catch it. They know that. Even the most novice baseball player or athlete knows about what it should look like and what the goal is, pretty much. Like, they know they weren't supposed to let that ball go between their legs. They understand why mom and dad bought that glove. They get that. You don't need to helicopter when it comes to critiquing everything. I have a rule that I work with coaches on. I say never critique the first physical error that they make. Now, hustle, it's a physical error, but it's more of a mental error. It's a I don't care error, I'm not going to hustle. A physical error, they really care about. They want to field that ground ball, but their ball, maybe they lift their glove up a little soon, or they go to throw the ball and their front side flies and their legs aren't set up right or whatever, and the ball sails. That's a physical error that I think we need to start looking at as, I don't need to correct everything on this, and definitely don't need to tell them that they need to fix it. I would tell them how to fix it, but maybe do it a little later and look for patterns. So there's your action plan. Praise early and often, look for the good, be specific with your praise, enforce your rules, always don't bend and surely don't break, and then critique your players intermittently. Check it. Hey, trust me. I had a dad come up to me one time. He's like, hey, I don't see you coaching them up on every single error. And I said, you didn't pay me to come out here. And this was a coach of a team. He brought me out as a consultant. And I said, did you pay me to get the players better? Or did you pay me to come out and coach the way you want to coach? And he goes, and I said it nicely. I said, hey, you didn't pay me to come out and do what you thought I should do. If so, you would have just done it yourself. You got me out here because you knew I knew what I was doing, or at least you think I know what I'm doing. And I'm coming out here and I'm doing it the way that I believe works the best because I've been in the trenches for a long time doing this and I've studied this a lot of different ways. And then he just goes, you're right. And I said, we don't need to correct every single error they make. And definitely during games, we don't need to, because the last thing you want is your player looking over their shoulder at you when the game's going on. The last thing you want them to do is have residual negativity in their mind about, I wonder what the coach thinks. I wonder what he's going to say. Okay? Build some confidence in these players. You're going to get them better without doing all that other stuff. Trust me. Praise early. Have rules. It's a win-win-win. There you go. The 3 action steps. All right. I get fired up on that stuff. It just really fires me up because it's just such a game changer. I mean, when you get there and you get this going, it's just such an amazing feeling as a coach. When you get all this working and you see the fun the players are having, but they're not going to push your rules. And then they also don't sit there and get all tight and looking over their shoulder because they're worried about you. They play loose. If you want to be a good athlete, you want your players to play athletically and smart and quick and intuitive. They got to be loose. They got to have their mind free. They can't be tense. They cannot be tense physically, and they cannot be looking over their shoulder thinking about what you're thinking. All right? It's so counterintuitive. It's so counterproductive. So how do we fix it? What are the root causes? Compliment, enforce your rules, and critique, but do it intermittently. Look for patterns. Look for a little bit of a trend before you jump in and say something. Do it to the side. Definitely don't do it across the field during the middle of a game, because very few things you're going to say, yell across the field to your first baseman, are going to save a run or save an issue during that inning. You can easily wait for the next out, okay? Because it's probably not going to happen again. I'm just saying, it's just not. I've been out on the baseball field for so many thousands and thousands and thousands of innings. It doesn't work that way. So be patient, look to critique a little later, and look for patterns, not just one-offs. Well, we're going to have to push part 3 to episode 61, and I'm going to share with you part 3 will become part 1 next Tuesday. I'm going to share with you the first thing you need to correct as a coach, the first thing as a player you need to correct when it comes to pitching delivery, the hitting delivery, the infield position, the outfield position. We're going to talk about what's the first thing to get right before you move on to anything else. And we're going to talk about that next Tuesday on the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. You guys, this has been Coach Bo. Love having you guys all here. You can see I'm passionate about this. And please take a second when you're done here as we finish this up and just go click the link, support the podcast. We'll keep this ball rolling, and hopefully not between our infielders' legs. We'll keep it rolling. Good quality content coming to you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Until next week, take care of yourselves, especially your health. Take care of that health. Take care of your families, and go out there and make the baseball community a better place with this information. Go out there and make the youth sports community a better place. Be a role model, a tone setter, an example, a model for all the other coaches in your community. And until next week, take good care of yourself. Adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Podcast. Take it to the field.